I never imagined that after 50 years of careful planning, of saving pennies where others spent dollars, I would wake up one morning to find our entire retirement gone. Not just misplaced, not just badly invested, gone. And worse still, I discovered what my husband had spent it on, a house. But not for us, not for the quiet little future we had spoken about for decades. He bought it for her. For the woman he had been seeing behind my back. My name is Ruth Ann. Where are you watching from today? I always love knowing the corners of the world where people sit down to hear these stories. Now, let me take you into mine, because the way this all unfolded still feels like a nightmare I never quite woke up from. It started with a letter in the mail, a plain envelope, nothing dramatic about it. I opened it while standing at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside me, sunlight on the linoleum. Inside was a statement from our retirement account. Only the numbers weren't what they should have been. I had looked at those balances every few months for years, like a gardener checking her plants. Always growing, slow and steady. But this time, the figure had dropped so low my first thought was a bank error. I checked again. Rubbed my glasses clean. No mistake. Hundreds of thousands. Money we'd both worked for, saved for, gone. I called the bank immediately, hands shaking. The woman on the other end was polite but businesslike. She told me the withdrawals had been authorized by my husband. Multiple large sums, signed and approved, spread across several months. I nearly dropped the phone. I asked her to repeat it, hoping I'd misheard, but she said it again. Clear as church bells. Your husband authorized these withdrawals. My legs felt weak. I sat down at the table, staring at the wallpaper I'd always meant to replace, and for the first time in years, I felt like the room was spinning. That night, I asked him directly. I kept my voice steady, though my heart thumped in my chest. Why is our retirement account empty? He froze. Not for long. But long enough for me to see something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, fear, maybe anger. Then he sighed, put on that calm tone he always used when he wanted to make me feel small. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I moved the money into investments. You wouldn't understand the details, investments. The word hung in the air like smoke. I knew him well enough to recognize the lie, but I swallowed it down for the moment. After all, this was the man I'd trusted since I was barely out of girlhood, the man I'd built my life with. Maybe he had some plan he hadn't shared yet. Maybe. But the unease wouldn't let me sleep. I got up in the middle of the night, crept downstairs, and pulled out the filing cabinet. I knew where he kept the property tax records, the insurance documents, all the boring papers of a long marriage. And right there, tucked in the back of a folder, I found it. A deed. I sat on the floor in my nightgown, reading the name and address on that paper over and over. A house. My husband had bought a house. And the name on the deed alongside his wasn't mine. It was hers. A woman's name I didn't recognize. At least not yet. I pressed my hand against my chest as if I could hold my heart together by force. All the years we had lived modestly, patching up old cars instead of buying new ones, skipping vacations so we could put money into that account, even downsizing to a smaller house when we didn't need the space anymore. All of it had gone into someone else's front porch and living room. I felt sick. Betrayal has a way of hollowing you out from the inside, and that night, I swear I could hear the echo. I didn't confront him right then. Not fully. I needed to know who she was. I needed to understand the scale of the life he had built behind my back. And somewhere deep down, I think I needed the truth to hurt as much as it could, so I would never again be tempted to excuse him. The next morning, he acted like nothing was wrong. He buttered his toast, read the newspaper, grumbled about the weather, and I smiled faintly, poured the coffee, pretending I hadn't found the deed that spelled the death of our marriage. But inside, I was already plotting, because if he thought he could steal my future and hand it to another woman, he had another thing coming. I couldn't shake the name I had seen on that deed. It followed me through the day like a shadow. Every time I tried to distract myself, washing dishes, folding laundry, it came back, staring at me in bold black ink. Who was she? What kind of woman agrees to a house built out of another wife's retirement savings? I didn't want to play detective. At 72, I thought I was done with mysteries and secrets. But when your entire future is yanked out from under you, survival makes you curious. So I sat at my old desktop computer, typed her name into the search bar, and waited. It didn't take long. A photograph popped up on a community website. A woman in her 50s, hair too blonde to be natural, smile too sharp to be friendly. She worked as a realtor, of all things. A realtor. No wonder she had charmed my husband with talk of houses, property values, investments. She sold him the fantasy of a new life, and he handed her my security in return. The bile rose in my throat. For a moment, I wanted to slam the computer shut and pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. Once you glimpse the crack in the glass, you can't go back to believing it's whole. That evening, when he came home late smelling faintly of cologne he never wore for me, I knew exactly where he had been. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I tested the waters. "Busy day?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He gave me the usual vague reply. Meetings ran long. Clients are demanding this time of year, clients. Yes, one in particular. I smiled, nodded, handed him his dinner plate. And in that moment, watching him tuck into the meal I had cooked while he planned a future with her, something hardened inside me. The kind of steel you only discover when life corners you. The next week, I decided to see for myself. I knew the address from the deed. It was only a half-hour drive away in a newer subdivision with manicured lawns and identical houses that looked like they had been stamped out of the same mold. I parked down the street and walked casually past, heart pounding. And there it was, the house that had stolen my retirement. Fresh paint, a neat little garden, curtains already hung, and standing at the door, laughing at something my husband said, was the woman from the photograph. I froze, half hidden behind a tree. My husband's hand rested on her back in a way it hadn't rested on me for years. They looked like a couple settling into their dream home, blissfully unaware that I was watching. The betrayal burned hotter than I expected. It wasn't just the money, it was the ease with which he had replaced me, slipped into a role with her as though I had been nothing more than a stepping stone. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. That night I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling while he snored softly, and I realized something with icy clarity. I didn't know this man anymore, and maybe I never had. The next morning, I played my part again, made the coffee, set out his toast, listened to him complain about the headlines, but inside, I was planning my next step. I needed proof, concrete evidence of his betrayal. Not for myself, I already knew the truth. But if I was going to take back control, I wanted every card stacked in my favor. So I called a lawyer. Quietly, discreetly, using the phone in the spare bedroom where he never went. I explained everything, from the missing retirement funds to the house with another woman's name on the deed. The lawyer listened, then sighed. "You'll need more than suspicion. Document everything, every withdrawal, every expense. If he's funneling money to her, we can build a case. Document everything." That became my new purpose. While he left for his so-called meetings, I went through our records like a woman possessed. I photocopied bank statements, snapped photos of deeds, even recorded little notes in a spiral-bound notebook. Each page was another nail in the coffin of the man I thought I knew. But as I gathered the evidence, I felt something unexpected. Not despair, power. For the first time in months, I wasn't just the victim of his choices. I was preparing, quietly arming myself. And with every document, every late-night phone call he thought I didn't hear, one thing became clear. This wasn't a fling. This was a full-blown life he was building with her. A house, a future, an escape from the woman who had shared his youth and given him her loyalty. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but the storm was coming, and he had no idea I was already bracing for it. I thought I was prepared. I'd seen the deed. I'd researched her name. I'd even watched them together outside the house. But nothing truly prepares you for standing in front of the place that represents the death of your future. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally decided I couldn't just circle around the truth anymore. I needed to see it with my own eyes, no hiding behind internet searches or bank statements. So I waited until he left for work, button-down shirt, briefcase in hand, still pretending to be the husband I knew, and then I followed. He drove 30 minutes, his old sedan coughing smoke as it went, and pulled into that tidy subdivision where every driveway had a freshly painted mailbox. I parked a street over, heart thudding so hard I thought I might faint. Then, slowly, I walked until I could see him clearly. There he was, my husband. Standing in front of a 2-story house with pale blue shutters, fumbling with a ring of keys like a teenager unlocking his first car. And beside him, her, the realtor mistress dressed in a crisp blouse, laughing as though this was the happiest day of her life. I couldn't move, my shoes rooted to the pavement as I watched them step inside, arm in arm. The door shut, and it felt like the last 50 years of my life had shut with it. It wasn't just a house. It was my sacrifice turned into their dream. Every time I'd chosen the cheaper dress, every time I'd said, "We don't need that vacation, let's save instead," I was unknowingly building walls for her living room. I wanted to scream, to run up and bang on the door, to demand what he thought he was doing. But instead, I stood there, in silence, letting the betrayal settle deep into my bones. Because sometimes, silence hurts more than shouting. I stayed long enough to see them through the front window, moving from room to room, pointing, smiling, planning. He was animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. For me, his words had grown short, his eyes tired. For her, he was alive again. That's when the anger finally cut through the sorrow. Not just at him, but at myself, too. For all those years, I'd mistaken routine for love, responsibility for loyalty. I thought we were weathering life's storms together. Turns out he'd just been waiting for fairer skies somewhere else. I drove home in a daze, headlights blurry through the tears. By the time I pulled into my driveway, something inside me had hardened. I would no longer sit quietly while he lived a second life on my dime. That night, when he came home late, I pretended nothing was wrong. "How was your day?" I asked, voice calm, hands steady as I washed the dishes. "Fine," he said, loosening his tie. "Busy." You know how it is, yes. I knew exactly how it was, but I let him believe his lies a little longer, because I needed to see just how deep this went. Over the next week, I started timing things. When he left when he came home, how long he was gone. I wasn't some naive wife anymore. I was an investigator in my own marriage. One Friday, he slipped out earlier than usual. I followed again, slower this time, giving him plenty of space. And sure enough, he went straight back to that house. This time, though, something was different. He wasn't just visiting. He was moving things, boxes, furniture. I watched from a distance as he hauled items from the trunk of his car, lamps, rugs, even a box of books I recognized from our own living room. That's when it hit me. He wasn't just playing house, he was building one. Piece by piece, he was transferring our life into hers. The betrayal deepened, thick as tar in my throat. He wasn't planning a future with me at all. That chapter was closed, at least in his mind. I drove home again, shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. By the time I reached the driveway, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was cold, number, like a statue carved out of ice. I sat at the kitchen table with the deed in front of me, staring at that address, that woman's name beside his, and I whispered to myself, "This is not the end of my story." Because if he thought he could humiliate me, strip me of security, and hand it all to a mistress with a perfect smile, he was wrong. The house might have been built with my money, but the story wasn't finished yet. And something deep down told me the walls of that place were hiding a twist none of us saw coming. The day it all came to a head was brighter than it had any right to be. Clear skies, birds chirping, neighbors mowing lawns, the sort of day that should have felt ordinary. But nothing in my life was ordinary anymore. That morning, my husband dressed with more care than usual. Freshly pressed shirt, polished shoes, even a splash of aftershave I hadn't smelled in years. He looked 10 years younger as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Big meeting?" I asked, my voice steady, though I already knew the answer. He gave a little smile. "Something like that." I watched him leave, carrying a small box under his arm. Not a briefcase this time. Something lighter. A box that looked suspiciously like the kind you might use to present keys. My pulse quickened. Today was the day. He was going to show her the house properly, hand her the keys like some kind of prize. My prize. My future. I waited 5 minutes, then slipped into my car and followed. The roads blurred past me, but my mind was sharp as glass. Every detail felt heightened. The crunch of gravel under my tires, the flicker of sunlight through the trees. By the time I reached the subdivision, I could already see them. Parked in front of that pale blue house with the neat little garden. He was holding her hand, smiling like a young man in love. She clutched his arm, laughing at something he whispered. They walked to the door together, like characters in a romantic comedy. And then, with a flourish, he pulled out the keys. I parked far enough away to stay hidden, but close enough to see it all. My breath caught as he slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. That's when everything unraveled, because instead of an empty, waiting house, voices spilled out. Children's laughter, a dog barking, and when the door swung wide, a family stood there, 2 adults, 3 kids, and a golden retriever wagging its tail. The mistress froze mid-step, her painted smile faltering. My husband blinked, confused, stammering like a fool. The man inside frowned. "Can we help you?" My husband sputtered. This is our house. I just bought it. These are our keys." He held them up like proof. The woman from inside crossed her arms. "I don't know who you are, but we've been renting this place for 2 months. Signed papers, paid the deposit, everything's legal." The mistress gasped, turning on him. "What do they mean, renting? You said you bought it outright." He looked from her to the family to his keys, panic rising in his voice. No, there must be some mistake. This is our home. I paid for this." But the truth was clear. They had been conned. Whoever sold him the house, whoever drew up that deed, had already double-dealt it. Rented it out, maybe even sold it to someone else entirely. The children peered from behind their mother, wide-eyed at the strange man yelling in their doorway. The father's voice grew firm. "You need to leave before I call the police." My husband's face turned beet red. He stammered again, words tumbling uselessly. The mistress yanked her hand from his, eyes blazing with fury. "You idiot," she hissed. "You absolute idiot! You gave away all that money and didn't even check?" Her voice carried across the street, sharp enough that a neighbor watering his lawn turned to watch. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. Already the spectacle was becoming a story for the whole neighborhood. And me? I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, watching it unfold like a play written just for me. The betrayal, the humiliation, it was all crashing down on him now, not on me. For once, I wasn't the fool. He tried to argue, waving the keys like a madman, but the family inside had already shut the door. The mistress stormed down the front steps, heels clicking against the pavement, and rounded on him in the driveway. "You promised me," she shouted. "You said this was ours. Do you know what I gave up for you? And now we're standing here like clowns in front of strangers?" Her voice broke into shrill sobs, echoing off the identical houses. My husband reached out to calm her, but she shoved him away. He stumbled, almost dropping the keys, which clinked uselessly against the asphalt. Neighbors had gathered now, whispering, pointing. The golden retriever barked from inside, adding absurdity to the scene. My husband bent to pick up the keys, shoulders sagging under the weight of his own. Downfall. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not pity, not rage, but release. For months I had carried the secret of his betrayal like a stone in my chest. And now, in broad daylight, the world saw him for what he truly was. A liar, a fool, a man undone by his own greed. I drove away before they could spot me. The sound of her angry voice fading in my rearview mirror was sweeter than any revenge I could have planned. But I knew this was only the beginning, because once the public humiliation settled, the real reckoning would have to happen at home. The drive home after that spectacle was the calmest I'd felt in months. My hands were steady on the wheel, my heart strangely light. Watching him squirm, humiliated in front of neighbors and strangers alike, was a kind of justice I hadn't even dared to hope for. But justice, I knew, was only half finished. The other half would come when he walked back through our door and had to face me. He came home late that night, much later than usual. When he finally pushed through the door, his face was pale, his tie loosened, his shoulders slumped like a boy who'd been scolded at school. I sat at the kitchen table with the deed and a stack of bank statements laid out in front of me, like evidence in a trial. I didn't bother standing. He froze when he saw me. For a moment, he opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. "Rough day?" I asked softly, my voice calm, almost pleasant. He swallowed hard. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I cut in. "I understand you emptied our retirement. I understand you bought a house for another woman, and I understand that when you unlocked the door today, strangers were already living there." His eyes widened. You were there?" "I didn't need to be." "The whole neighborhood was there by the end, wasn't it?" "But yes, I saw enough." He collapsed into the chair across from me, running his hands through his thinning hair. For once, he looked every bit his age. "She told me it was ours," he muttered. "She swore?" "She?" I interrupted. "You mean your mistress? The woman you chose over me? The one you gave my future to?" His face crumpled. "It wasn't like that." I laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Then tell me, what was it like? Was it charity? Was it community service, buying her a home with my savings? Or were you just so desperate to feel young again that you sold your soul for a few compliments and a fake smile?" He didn't answer. And in his silence, I found the truth louder than any confession. The next days were chaos. The mistress, she wasn't quiet. She called our house more than once, screaming into the phone about how he'd ruined her life, how she'd trusted him, how she'd be the laughingstock of the entire town. I didn't bother hanging up. I just listened, occasionally setting the receiver down on the counter to let her rant into the empty air. It was almost comical, really. The two of them tearing each other apart while the wreckage of their betrayal lay all around them. Word spread quickly, as it always does. By the end of the week, neighbors were whispering at the grocery store. Friends were calling to check in, their voices dripping with curiosity they barely tried to hide. One woman even stopped me in the frozen foods aisle, leaning in with wide eyes. "Is it true? Did he really?" I straightened my shoulders, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Yes, every word of it." And just like that, I wasn't the one hiding anymore. He was. He stopped going to the diner where he used to meet friends. He avoided the barber shop. Even walking to the mailbox seemed a humiliation too heavy to bear. He shrank into himself, a man collapsing under the weight of his own disgrace. One evening, he tried again. Sat across from me at the table, voice hoarse. "We can fix this. We can start over. Please." I stared at him for a long moment, then reached across the table and tapped the deed with my fingertip. "You didn't just cheat on me. You stole from me. You robbed me of the future I built with my own hands. And for what? To impress a woman who doesn't even want you anymore?" His eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. The well of pity in me had run dry. That night, I moved into the guest room, the first step in separating my life from his. In the silence of that smaller room, I realized something important. His downfall wasn't my burden to carry. The humiliation, the gossip, the angry mistress, all of that belonged to him. My role now was to decide what came next for me. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt like mine again. It's a funny thing about small communities. Your business never stays yours for long. A whisper in the morning becomes a headline by afternoon. And by the end of the week, everyone from the mailman to the church choir knows the intimate details of your life. At first, I dreaded it. I imagined myself walking into the grocery store, every head turning, every whisper aimed like an arrow at my back. But when it happened, something unexpected washed over me. It wasn't pity I saw in their eyes. It was sympathy, respect even. "Oh, Ruth Ann," one woman said softly at the pharmacy, "we heard what he did. You didn't deserve that another neighbor left flowers on my porch, no note attached. Just a quiet gesture. For once, I wasn't the one carrying shame. It was him. He, on the other hand, couldn't show his face without shrinking. The diner where he used to linger over coffee? He stopped going altogether. The hardware store, the post office, anywhere he went, people stared. Some shook their heads, others muttered under their breath. I caught wind of one conversation at the gas station, two men leaning against their trucks, voices low. "Imagine throwing away 50 years for some painted-up realtor," one said. "Desperate fool," the other replied. My husband must have heard the same words wherever he went, because soon he hardly left the house at all. He sat in his chair, newspaper unopened, TV flickering while he stared at nothing. The once proud man who had strutted into that mistress's arms was gone, replaced by someone small, broken. But here's the thing. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. Because while he hid, I was stepping into the light again. I went back to church, sat among friends who pressed my hands in comfort. I walked the aisles of the grocery store with my head high, no longer afraid of whispers. If anything, I let them roll over me like waves. My children, grown with lives of their own, called often. At first they were angry, protective. My son said, "Mom, you have to leave him. Don't let him drag you down." My daughter said, "You deserve better than this, and you always have." Their words were both balm and fire. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the years I'd given weren't wasted. They'd produced children who saw my worth even when my husband didn't. One evening, after yet another tense silence at dinner, I finally broke the stillness. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I said flatly. His fork clattered against the plate. "What? You heard me. I'm not going to spend what years I have left cleaning up your messes. I want a divorce." His face crumpled, eyes wet. "Ruth Ann, please, don't do this. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" My voice rose, sharp and unshakable. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is leaving the milk out. You didn't make a mistake. You made choices. Deliberate, selfish choices that cost me everything I worked for. And now you want me to pretend it was just a slip?" He dropped his head into his hands. For the first time, I saw him truly defeated. But it didn't move me. The man I'd married was long gone, and the hollow figure in front of me was just the shadow left behind. Word of my decision spread as quickly as the scandal had. Some friends called me brave. Others confessed in hushed voices that they'd envied me for years, thinking I had the perfect marriage. "Funny how we never really know what happens behind closed doors," one neighbor murmured. She was right. We never do. But here's what I knew now. Shame belongs to the guilty, not the betrayed. And I was done carrying what wasn't mine. That night, I slept in the guest room again. But this time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. I was stepping into a new chapter, one without him, one where my worth wasn't measured by his choices. The years behind me were filled with sacrifice, yes, but the years ahead, they would be mine. And as I lay there in the quiet, I realized something simple, something powerful. Losing him wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of reclaiming it. The divorce papers felt heavier than their weight when I slid them. Across the lawyer's desk, ink on paper, yes, but also 50 years of marriage reduced to legal terms. Half a century of dinners, vacations, quarrels, and quiet evenings now cataloged in cold black letters. When I walked out of that office, the air tasted sharper, freer. I wasn't anyone's wife anymore. I was just Ruth Ann. For the first time since I was a girl, that title stood on its own. The process wasn't easy. He fought at first, pleading, bargaining, promising to change. But there was no changing what had already been broken. The trust was gone. The money was gone. The future we'd planned together was gone. All that remained was the truth, and the truth was enough to guide me forward. I sold the house we'd shared. Too many memories clung to the walls, some sweet, some sour, all heavy. Instead, I found myself a small cottage on the edge of town, with a porch just big enough for a rocking chair and a patch of garden to tend. It wasn't the retirement I'd dreamed of, but it was mine. Mine alone. Friends came often, bringing casseroles, laughter, and gentle company. I joined a quilting circle at the community center. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. My brush strokes were clumsy, but every color felt like a declaration. I am still here. I am still living. There were quiet victories, too. The first time I balanced my own checkbook and saw that, though my savings were slimmer, they were steady. The first time I drove to the ocean on my own, sat on the sand with a thermos of tea, and realized I didn't need anyone beside me to feel complete. As for him, well, his downfall was swift. The mistress cut ties after the house debacle. She spread her own version of the story, of course, painting herself as the victim. But in truth, they had both used each other, and neither came out with dignity intact. He stayed in town, but smaller somehow. A ghost of the man he once was, lurking in shadows, avoiding the eyes of people he used to greet with a wave. Occasionally, I'd catch sight of him from my car window, stooped, gray, clutching a bag of groceries like the weight of it might topple him. Once he tried to stop me in the parking lot. "Ruth Ann," he said softly, voice trembling, "I miss you." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "You miss the woman who covered for your mistakes. The one who cooked your dinners, cleaned your messes, and kept your secrets. That woman is gone." And I walked away. In the solitude of my new life, I discovered a strange, unexpected gift. Peace. Not the peace I'd envisioned with him, traveling and holding hands into old age, but a quieter, sturdier kind. Peace born of knowing the worst had happened, and I'd survived it. The nights were different now. Instead of lying awake wondering where he was, I drifted off with a book in my lap, the lamp casting soft light. Instead of feeling hollowed by betrayal, I felt filled by possibility. Some evenings I'd sit on my porch and watch the sun sink below the trees, golden light spilling over the yard. I'd think of all I had lost, yes, but I'd also think of all I still had. My children, my friends, my health, my freedom. I began to realize that sometimes life doesn't give you what you planned. It gives you what you need. And though I never would have chosen this path, I walked it with my head high. One afternoon, as I pruned roses in my little garden, a neighbor paused on the sidewalk. "You look happier," she said. I smiled, wiping soil from my gloves. "I am." And I meant it. The betrayal had scarred me, yes. But scars aren't just reminders of pain. They're proof of healing, proof that we endure, that we keep moving forward even when someone tries to take everything from us. In losing my marriage, my retirement, and the illusions I'd held onto for years, I'd gained something far greater. Myself. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Telling this story hasn't been easy, but I share it for a reason. We spend our lives building trust, brick by brick, year by year. And sometimes, in a single act, that trust can be smashed to dust. My husband thought he could gamble away my future, thought I'd quietly fade into the background while he played house with another woman. But life has a way of turning the tables. His betrayal became his undoing, not mine. To those listening, especially those of you in long marriages or with savings tied to another's choices, guard your future. Ask the questions. Look at the papers. Don't let love blind you to the details. Trust is beautiful, but blind trust can be dangerous. And yet, I don't sit here bitter. I sit here freer than I've been in decades. The house is gone, the retirement smaller, but the weight of lies is no longer on my shoulders. I laugh louder, I sleep better, and I wake up knowing I answer only to myself. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Betrayal may break your heart, but it does not have to break you. Sometimes, what looks like an ending is really a beginning in disguise. I lost the life I thought I'd have, but I gained the life I deserved, and in the end, that's worth more than any house.